Hey Cardfighters, today we're gonna do something special, something we never done before on the channel. It's a tier list! You guys are probably aware by the fact that Chrono Dragon Next Stage as well as Chronojet finally makes its way to the English format, so we can finally play with those decks. And I'm also starting to do this deck spotlights for that particular set on the channel. And last time we talked about and tackled the Altma deck, which means the next deck spotlights on this channel will be about Chrono Dragon Next Stage as well as Chronojet. So I thought, why not do something special before we go into that deck profile itself, and let's talk about all the different forms of Chronojet in the past, all the way back at the beginning of G era to the Chrono Dragon Next Stage that we have right now in the V era. And instead of me just talking about these cards in general, I thought, why not do a tier list and see if you guys enjoy this type of format, and maybe I'm gonna do this more often for different types of subjects. So let me know in the comments down below if you guys enjoy this style of videos, and who knows, I might do this more often on the channel. So with that said, let's jump right into the meat and potatoes of this video and start with the tier list. And we're gonna do it in chronological order, so we're gonna go back all the way to GBT01 with the original Chronojet Dragon. Well, it wasn't in the GBT01 set, but it was with the trial decks that accompanied this set. And that means we're gonna start about the original Chronojet Dragon. And this one basically is a nostalgia card. It's what started everything for Gear Chronicle, and it should in itself be a high rating, and also should explain how I'm rating these cards. It's basically a combined factor of how much I like the artwork, as well as how strong are the skills, and how impactful these cards were in the deck, how I personally use them. So even if they might be super meta relevant, if I never liked the card or never really used them, that probably gives them more minus points. So for Chronojet Dragon, I think it's a pretty solid B tier. It's not the most amazing cards of what you can expect for Gear Chronicle. It has the rewind effect, which is pretty nice. It also has a pretty good GB2 ability, which gave him the guard restrict, so which on itself was one of the more stronger GB2 skills on the Strider units themselves. But Chronojet Dragon Stride skill was, in my opinion, a bit underpowered because rewinding cards is way less effective than just outright retiring unless you're up against Grand Blue, but Grand Blue wasn't really a thing until Night Rose became a thing, and even then was quite underpowered. But it gets bonus point for the artwork, as it's the OG artwork and definitely is better than the reprint artwork, which we're gonna go out in later. So it's a B tier for now, but maybe it goes up the further we go down the video. So then next up, the next Chronojet Dragon card that we get is of course the evolution version, which is Chrono Dragon Next Stage. And this has to be an S tier for me, because this is the original boss unit for Gear Chronicle, and it basically made the deck and the clan actually playable, and till this day is still being used as a namesake for restanders or very strong potential restanding or restanding going back into other units, like we see now with the new Strides in the Premium Collection for Gear Chronicle, which is seen as a new Next Stage version, but also for things like Grand Blue, which also is referred to as a Next Stage card. So this has to be an S tier. Not only is this skill really strong, was pretty impactful at the time, but also the artwork is really good. Then the next era of cards was with the new GBT5 as well as the new trial deck for Chronojet, which introduced the time leap keyword. And it also introduced us with Chrono Dragon. And Chrono Dragon has to be S tier. It is probably the highest tier card among them for several reasons. Not only is the artwork amazing, it's probably my most favorite SP card that I possess, and just SPs outright made for Vanguard in general, because the SP looks gorgeous. But also this card has been useful like almost the entire time for Gear Chronicle, until the point where they just make ZTB as xenophobic as possible, where we just couldn't really utilize this card and went with the newest form of Chrono Dragon, which was Chrono Dragon Z. This card was so good, it allows you to do so many things, even in the early stages of ZTB, that there's no way that you cannot put this card lower than an S tier. Like, everybody would just agree that this is one of the best high-rated versions of Chronojet out there. Then also in this trial deck, we've got the reprinted version of Chronojet with a new pose. I'm personally not really that fan of this card. I would say C tier, maybe even D tier, because it's basically the same Chronojet, but the artwork definitely puts it down in my honest opinion, as it didn't really feel that right. The old artwork had such much better imposing threat, or just had a presence around them that these new artwork didn't really have. So for now, it's C tier, maybe goes down to D tier if I'm gonna be really honest. Now, it will take quite a while before we got some more new forms of Chronology Dragon, because the next form will be in the later trial deck for the ZTB trial deck, as well as with the extra booster for Gear Chronicle, Gears of Fate. I believe they were released around the same time, so I'm not sure which is the chronological order, if Gear Groovy came before the trial deck or the trial deck came before Gear Groovy, but I will chunk them together. So we're going to start off with the new Chrono Dragon, which was Chronogen G. And this, for me, is honestly a D tier. I'm not really a fan of the artwork. I like the older version better, but I can see the appeal of this one. But the skill of this Chronogen Dragon was just, in my honest opinion, abysmal. It was inferior to the original counterpart. I know that certain people tried to make it work, and there were lists out there that utilized it, but I never really was a fan of the skill. I still utilized the original Chrono Dragon in my ZTB build all the way up until GBT 14. And the reason for that is that this particular Chrono Dragon just copied a grade of a unit that you superior call via a time leap skill or something else, that like with split packets. So if you call a grade 2, you can shove it into Soul to call another grade 2. So it didn't really help you start up combos. It basically was an extender of your combos itself. So meaning if you don't have the correct cards on the field, or you cannot build the correct setup, then you're not going to get a lot of value. And it also conflicted with split Pegasus to some extent, because you're going to put a grade 3 in back to the deck to call 2 grade 2s. Then what's the point of Chrono Dragon? Because calling a third grade 2 does really nothing for you. In that same example, the old Chrono Dragon actually build that for you, because when you go into your first try turn, you have the new Chronojet Dragon G, which allows you to get a time leap effect on stride. So which means when you go into split Pegasus, you could time leap Chrono Dragon into a grade 1, then the Chrono Dragon goes into Soul, which gives you a Chronojet Dragon. Then that Chronojet Dragon could be put back into the deck with split Pegasus to call out 2 grade 2s, which basically gives you a +3 out of your Chrono Dragon. That's way better than what Chrono Dragon G ever could give you at the time. So for that is why Chrono Dragon G was basically tossed to the side from day one, and I never really utilized the card at all because it was so inferior to the original Chrono Dragon. Then, talking about that, we have the new Chronojet Dragon G, and I am really fan of this one. It's definitely an upgrade to the original one. The free time leap on stride skill is so amazing that it allows you to set up so many boards and combos, which I just explained with Chrono Dragon, the original version. And also its Vanguard ability, when you go back into it, in some regards is even better than the original one, which cost you Counterblast. And yes, the guard restrict with the glory skill is really nice, but sometimes the extra power is much better if utilized correctly, especially with the new stride that we've got that flipped your entire G-Zone face up, and with more and more ZTB on the horizon, this card would become better and better, which was also a pivotal point for a insane multi-tech loop that you could do with Sparacore and Unicorn, because you give your front row so much power. Then, talking about that stride unit, we've got the newest evolution of Chronojet in this extra booster set, which was Chrono Dragon Gear Groovy. So basically it was the evolution version of Chrono Dragon Next Stage. And you could say this is an S tier because the artwork is really nice, and it's basically an evolved version of Next Stage, but I'm actually going to toss it in A tier. And the reason for that is that it basically doesn't really do anything new what Next Stage does. It's basically Next Stage plus something else. Do you want to have the extra crit of Ragnarok? Do you want to have potentially some extra call with How Long? Do you want to get some extra power with something else? It was basically a Next Stage plus, but it was more setup, and it took you more time to get there. There were some upsides to this, that you flip up multiple cards in your G-Zone, which allowed you to do multiple things with Chronojet Dragon G. But the main reason why I put it lower than Next Stage is because of this card. Gear Chronicles strides from here on out would become way more limited than it would have been if this card never was printed. Because all the cards afterwards, there was a Gear Dragon to some extent, had some kind of convoluted way that were first an act ability and then went into an auto ability to not be able to synergize with this card. Which meant that Chrono Dragon Next Stage skill was capped at because of this card. There was no other cards that would be synergizing with it unless they were that non-important or that weak that it wouldn't really impact the card at all. Only until we've got History Build Dragon in Premium Collection 2019 would Chrono Dragon next stage or Gear Groovy not see a power buff or an increase in potential, which we thought it would because it was a unlimited potential card, as it could copy any card's auto ability that would be printed in the future, but that's not the case here. So after this release, it took some time before we actually would see new forms of Chronojet Dragon. But interesting enough, this is the first time that we see lower grade versions of Chronojet Dragon, which aren't Chronogen or aren't a grade 3 or grade 4, as we've got Transit Dragon and Cruising Dragon. And depending on who you ask, this could be seen as a Chronojet form and could not. I mean, they look similar to Chronojet and they're basically the ZTB version, so I'm gonna count them as Chronojet forms. And Transit Dragon is for me a B tier. It's a solid +1, but actually not really because it's a cycle card, but if you could time leap into it or you could fetch it out, it was basically pretty good. So it was just a good solid consistency target. The artwork, however, takes it a little bit down because I'm not really that fan of the Transit Dragon artwork. Cruising Dragon, however, is for me a solid A tier. The artwork is pretty nice, but the skill is also really, really good. The consistent searching allowed you to get to your other really good ZTB cards or your generic heals, so you could have some good G-Guard targets, which would also become much, much stronger once we get the latest evolution of Chronojet Dragon. But it also synergized really nicely with what we already got in ZTB with Split Pegasus, as you could turn your Chrono Dragon into a grade 3 and then turn those into 2 Cruising Dragons, and the Time Leap Chrono Dragon would be turned into a Transit Dragon. And that you can already see how much draw potential you could get out of that single stride skill. Not even your stride, but mainly your stride skill of Chrono Dragon with Chrono Dragon G. And that's the reason why Chrono Dragon is definitely an up the skill of Chrono Dragon G. Then after this support wave for Gear Chronicle, we've got the second support wave immediately the set afterwards, where we also got the Vanquisher support. We've got the newest, latest evolution of Chronojet Dragon in a Strider form, as we've got Chrono Dragon Gear next. And this is for me, obviously, an S tier. Artwork is amazing, skill is amazing, it's a resender that resends itself, meaning triggers can stack on top of it, so you could utilize it in multiple ways. It also allows you to, instead of discarding cards, shuffle them back into your deck, so you can put triggers from your hand onto the field, attack with them, and then shuffle them back into your deck, which opened up for multiple interesting combination plays. So Gear Dragon next, or Chrono Dragon Gear next, is definitely an S tier for me because it's such a solid and strong card, and this cemented the new era of the ZTB Gear Chronicle deck. Cruising Dragon and Transit Dragon were already a really good start, but Chrono Dragon Gear next basically cemented for what it was and was a good founding cornerstone for once it's gonna evolve again. Because the next evolution for Gear Chronicle was also the last set for the G era before we got the whole Bermuda debacle, is GBT14 Divine's Dragon Apocrypha. And this gave us the Z versions of Chronojet's evolution, as we've got Chrono Dragon Z. And at the beginning, I wasn't really that fan of this artwork, also because it was a common and there was no SP for us in the international side, so that also got it a downgrade in my honest opinion. And also, the skill itself is needed because it allows you to bind a card early game, so you could still attack with your Mary Block Dragon, your Party Block Dragon or something like that, the grade 2 10k, because if you didn't use this as a starter, there was a chance you ride it and you cannot attack with it. So it wasn't mandatory. The skill was nice that you could search out any grade 3 or a potential grade 1, but in comparison to the original Chrono Dragon, it was definitely weaker in my honest opinion, but because we got the new Chronojet, which didn't really time leap anymore directly, meant the Chrono Dragon didn't really work as efficient. So we had to utilize this new as starter, but I'm gonna put it into C tier because I wasn't really that fan of the card itself, but I was forced to run it to make the deck as consistent as possible. Then for Chronojet, the evolution, Chronojet Dragon Z, definitely S tier. Artwork is amazing. Him in the white color is... Honestly, at the beginning, I didn't thought it could work, but now the more and more I've played with the card, the more and more I started to like it. Also, the skill is phenomenal. The way that you get so much plus engine is insane. Also, the combos and potentials and playstyles that opens up is like infinite. There are so many different ways that you can utilize this card or utilize different cards in your deck while combining this as a main Vanguard. And I've talked about this at the the very first deck profile that I did on the channel about this particular deck, the Exodia Chronojet deck, where you could use your stride fodders in so many different ways because of this card allowing you to stride with Great Freeze from your drop zone and binding them that way. And there are way more options that this card opens up, which makes this card, in my honest opinion, a god tier of a card. So definitely S tier because it's really, really good. Then the next step of evolution is, of course, the controversial Chronovisor Heritage. And I'm gonna be honest, yes, the white color works with Chronojet, but I am not really that much of a fan of this artwork for the evolution. Also, this card looks more like a Chronojet Dragon being bigger than it actually being a next stage or a gear next or a gear groovy. It looks completely different than any other of the official stride forms of Chronojet. And the skill is pretty damn insane. It's really strong to get an additional turn, but I wasn't really that fan of the skill itself. Yes, I was playing it because it was the best deck and it really worked with the whole ZTB engine, but there wasn't really some insane combos that you can make out of getting the extra turn. It's not something that we've seen with Gear Next, for example, or with Gear Groovy. That wasn't the case. It was just you get an extra turn, so you just swing with another 26 Vanguard attack, and that's about it. Your multi-attack came from your rear guards, and that's basically what the deck was around. So for me, because it was such a linear card and you were forced to take a certain direction with the playstyle, I will put it in the A tier because yes, it's still a godly powerful card and it warped the meta to a certain degree and people really, really hated the card for obvious reasons. But I personally wasn't really that much fan of the card itself because it limited what the deck actually could do because it was relatively one-dimensional in that aspect with the Vanguard at least. The rear guards opened up a lot of options, but yeah, not really the best fan of it. Then, with that, we enter the new V era, and all the new cards for Chronology Dragon are basically in the trial deck and in a new extra booster, so that basically leaves us with 4 more cards, and we have, of course, the new version of Chrono Dragon. And the artwork is neat, it's cute, but it's just a generic starter, so I'm just gonna put it in the C tier because it's, for all intents and purposes, this could be just any other card. There is no real reason to play it besides just having the Chrono Dragon artwork, and I don't think the artwork can carry the card enough to a higher skill than just a C tier. It definitely escapes the D tier because it's useful and the artwork is pretty neat, whereas the original Chrono Dragon G was just useless. The artwork was good, but the skill is dragging it down. But that said, it at least had some options where this is just generic, so I'm just having to put it in D tier, if I'm going to be very honest, because it's unfair to Chronojet G to say that that's a D tier if this is just a generic starter. So that's why I just have to put them in D tier for that matter. Then also the next one, this is another unexpected Chronojet Dragon card. You can say if it's Chronojet Dragon or not, but it is basically a grade 1 Chronojet. It even has the scarf, and this is just, Bearing Rover. In my opinion, is also a D card. It's basically a different version of Wedge Move Dragon Kid, and interesting enough, it doesn't really, it fits within the Chronojet Dragon playstyle for V because we have Smoke Gear Dragon, so having another Strider or a Stride Enabler, yeah, doesn't really make sense, so I'm quite disappointed in this card. The artwork is amazing, the artwork is high tier, but sadly the skill just makes it garbage and just it doesn't give you incentive to actually play it. Then, with that said, we go to the final 2 cards, and we go to the new Chronojet Dragon, which also is being named Chronojet Dragon V, and this is a very simple and obvious S tier. I mean, there's no other reason to not put it in S tier. It's a Superior Rider or Strider Enabler for the V series, so that's already a really good thing. Which also means it's really good in Premium as it allows you to do all those shenanigans. It has the Force Markers, it's had the Chronojet Dragon name, which is also a big plus. But the biggest plus of this card is that it has a Vanguard Circle as well as a Rearguard Circle skill, which gives him the Sentinel Restrict, which is actually pretty good in a Force Clam that can pump out multiple Force Markers and also can pump up a lot of power. So this card is really, really good. And then, with that said, we go to the final card, which is Chrono Dragon Next Stage, the latest VR of the extra booster set for 14, the next stage. And you're probably wondering where I'm going to put this card. Is it going to be an S tier? or it's going to be an A tier, a B tier, C tier, or all the way down to a D tier. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's an amazing restander. It is the freest restander. It actually gives you advantage with in combination with Chrono Dragon, Chronojet Dragon, but its power mainly comes from Chronojet Dragon himself. Because if Chronojet Dragon didn't come with the guard restrict, it will be way less impactful than it actually is right now. Also, the fact that it needs Chronojet Dragon in heart, which is just like the original one, makes it a little bit restricted, but the original had the upside that it was a G-Zone card. So you could just put it in your G-Zone and it wouldn't really impact the consistency of your main deck. This does. So that drags it down a little bit. Also, a big problem with this one is it needs your opponent to be on grade 3, so you cannot utilize this card if you go first. So with those restrictions in mind, I cannot put it in S tier, but I'm definitely going to put it in A tier because it's a super strong card. It's insanely powerful. The artwork is top notch, but it could have been a little bit better if they didn't put it into the restriction that Gear Chronicle right now has with main grade 4 deck cards, as well as the superior right engine, as well as the fact that this card needs your opponent to be grade 3, which makes it a little bit slower or at least less consistent like other cards. And I would have put it in S tier if it wasn't for the fact that I already seen that Overlord the Cross is basically the next stage, but it can be utilized on the first grade 3 turn. So that's the reason why I put this card a little bit lower and put it back into the A tier. There you have it. That's basically my tier list for all the evolutions and forms for Chronojet Dragon. As you can see, the top part is pretty stacked. S tier and A tier has most of the cards, and that's actually to be expected. Most Chronojet Dragon cards are really, really powerful, and they carry the entire Gear Chronicle clan all the way from way back at the beginning of Gear Chronicle to still this day with the V series. So it's very warranted that those cards are very high tier. And interesting enough, on the bottom list we have the 2 Chronodrens, which for my honest reasons are because of their uselessness nature, because G wasn't really that great. I never utilized it, and the new V version is basically a generic starter but just with the artwork, and that's not good enough to put it on a high list rating for this tier list for me, honestly. But with that said, I'm curious what you guys' tier list looks like for the Chronojet forms, so I'll put a link to the tier list in the description down below, and I'd like you guys to tweet your tier list at my Twitter handle at MrTimeleap to see where you guys' opinion stands. If you guys agree with this tier list, or if you guys think there's a lot of inconsistency here and things should definitely be switched around by certain factors. Everybody has a different opinion. I'm curious what your tier list is for Chronojet Dragon, so tweet me at MrTimeleap your tier list. And don't forget, tomorrow we're gonna dive into the deck spotlight for Chrono Dragon next stage, as well as Chronojet Dragon. So if you're interested in on the different ways that you can build the new Chronojet Dragon build, then definitely subscribe and hit the bell button to be updated when I upload that video tomorrow. As always, this video and everything on the channel has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply do that by going over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm MrTimeleap, and I see you guys in the next one!